Greetings, friends. Oz here, transmitting to you from planetOZ, literally through the interstellar plenum of outer space. Technology is just amazing. And I understand it is Halloween month for you all down there, so happy Halloween. I'm celebrating with you. I actually imported this hat from Earth, where I guess you guys are into some Carrie Hotter thing or something like that. You guys are into some just weird stuff, but the hat is rad, and this is my Halloween costume. And so today I'm going to chat a little bit about animal ascension. And I made a film some months back that's animated, and it's called The Incredible Gift We Give Our Pets, and I'll link to it here, and it talks about this topic, animal ascension, but I want to elaborate on it somewhat because there's much more to discuss. And what I'm talking about here, and I'm going to be sharing with you, comes largely from the Law of One, which is where I've seen this discussed the most. However, it's still not discussed a lot. And if anyone's out there, you're watching this, and you know of a good resource that goes into greater detail regarding animal ascension, I would really like to check that out. So drop a line or whatnot. I'd be interested to hear. There are some other sources, and I have looked at some stuff, but so far the Law of One seems to be the thing that has the stuff. So I do encourage you to check out that film that I made before. If this is a topic of interest to you, you'll probably really like that. But just to nutshell it's describing what is described in the Law of One, in saying that there is essentially living and walking around and wandering the earth, and most apparent to our senses, our sight, sound, hearing, smell, all that stuff, we have three densities. We have the first density that is earth, air, fire, and water. We have the second density that is plants and animals, and the third density, which is us. And so you can identify all of this stuff as conscious. This is according to the Law of One, but then interpreted by me, as I on planetOZ tend to integrate esoteric ideas and see them through a lens. And so it's put to you, and your wisdom will decide if anything resonates or is worth keeping or not. But for me, there was a lot of resonance in the Law of One and its discussion about these densities of consciousness. And so if you look around, you see earth, air, fire, and water on one level, plants and animals on another level, and humans on our third density consciousness on another level. And so the earth, air, fire, and water, they have consciousness, but they don't have awareness. And without any awareness, it's just the rocks are just molded by the water and all of that. But with awareness, you then get the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom, and this is basically, you could identify this as anything that attempts to preserve its own survival in some way. So the sunflower turning toward the light is an intentional, conscious act of preserving the existence of the flower. And so across the entire plant kingdom, they reach toward the light. They are always reaching toward the light. They will shed leaves if the leaves are pulling too much energy when there isn't enough sun to collect. They do all of these things that earth, air, fire, and water don't do. And animals, of course, act the same way. Predators chasing prey, and the prey tries to run and survive and all of that. But the idea is that the animal doesn't have a sense of self-awareness. It's aware of life. It's aware to some extent of the school or the pack or whatever it's in, but it doesn't doesn't think of itself as an individuation or an individual, and consequently, at such a moment as an animal comes to the realization of this individuation, that is when the animal is said to be harvestable from the second density into the third, which basically means it doesn't happen in that incarnation. It means the entity that is currently individuated and living within that animal, once the animal dies in this third density or second density life cycle for that being, when it incarnates again, it will incarnate in the third density as a human form, basically an upgraded primate is the vessel of the third density here and on Earth. But as the story goes, if you were to do your third density experience on another planet, you might find that it was the mantis that had evolved far enough along to become a mantis hominid vessel, allowing for third density experience. On another planet, it might be an avian. On another planet, it might be a reptilian. And so if you're looking at all that and you hear all of that stuff coming out of extraterrestrial lore, and you're wondering what to make of it or how that even makes any sense, it's essentially a combination of what I guess you could describe as a universal plan form for third density existence. And I don't think this is a rule as much as it's kind of a general guide that plan form is essentially a hominid. Hominid is kind of the box that it would seem in general the universe is checking in a vessel for third density life. What that hominid emerges from is where biological evolution can play a very big role, one planet to the next. And so this is another way of saying that the implication we get, my interpretation of what's said in the Law of One, is that you're not going to go to a planet and find that the third density life all looks like grasshoppers, or it's all praying mantises jumping around, and that's third density life. It's not that. It's that the same code that is woven through the fabric of the Akashic field and was woven through the fabric of our cosmos and everything we understand, that comes with a bunch of blueprints, that comes with a bunch of, they can be biological blueprints, it can be everything, informing everything else. And so consequently, life, if you go to visit on another planet, it's not going to look exactly like life on Earth, but it's not going to look as foreign, as the story goes, as we might imagine. So you might look around and you might see things and say, I think that thing is informed by the giraffe, and that thing is informed by the elephant, and this is very similar to the octopus that we have on our planet. It's going to be like that because the code is universal. And so this universal code informs all of these designs, and as those who frequently watch planetOZ are well aware, I'm very into the ET hypothesis, the extraterrestrial topic, and all that entails. And in some ways, the Law of One is kind of, so some people describe it and think of it as basically like a post-grad studies text for UFO nerds and people who are into this topic. If you want to take it to the most thought-provoking and wild place, very heady. It's not for the faint of heart. But that is the Law of One, according to a lot of people, in an opinionated sense. I tend to agree. It's very dense. It is like, if I would have read it 25 years ago or whenever I first started really getting into the topic, I would have had no idea what to make of it. And so it really isn't until I think people start asking, getting a little off topic here, but if you go to like one of these conventions where they're looking at UFO stuff and ET things, and I go to these things, and I go to conventions that are about consciousness and things like that. I'm into all of this stuff, and what you find is that in recent years, these ET UFO conferences have started to become more of a blend with a lot of consciousness stuff mixed in there. And so consequently you end up with these two camps, which, to put it in the most basic terms, these camps are basically described as, you got the nuts and bolts camp, and you have the I'm not sure what you would actually call the other camp. I guess the consciousness camp would be the next. That there is a very important interrelated aspect of what we experience and what we know of our place within the galactic community. There's an important aspect of that has to do with consciousness. And so this is starting to emerge, whereas there's also still a very strong faction and many people who are into the nuts and bolts approach to the whole topic, which is basically where you're looking for eyewitness accounts, you're looking for videos, you're looking for photos, you're looking for where there might be burn marks in the ground if something were to land, you're looking for what it did to the trees, what happened. So all of this is about unpacking this nuts and bolts idea, and typically a visitor is regarded simply and only as a being from another planetary body somewhere out in space who has crossed that expanse using highly advanced technology and landed here. The nuts and bolts approach to the topic doesn't really integrate things like interdimensionality, planes of the Earth itself, inner Earth ideas, consciousness being a factor, and spirituality is typically nowhere to be found. And it's also not usually an area of interest in which what the beings are saying to us, I don't know why I just did a whole thing like that, but anyway, what the beings are, the messages of what they say, messages that we, if you dip your toe into it, you quickly find that it's peace, love, ascension, spirituality, evolution, all of this kind of stuff. That's all what is nested in the broader concept, the consciousness aspect. But these two camps of people are commingling and making their way together in this ET hypothesis space. And anyway, so this was a long way of just getting to the point that when I personally would have considered myself a nuts and bolts thinker on the issue and was really looking for the nuts and bolts answers, the Law of One would not have been appealing to me. You need a lot of that nuts and bolts stuff in order to understand it, but it's like, that's why it's considered like this post-grad advanced text whatever for ET. It's only in the moment where one really stops looking at the nuts and bolts stuff so purely and starts to ask, what are they saying? And allowing for the fact that it may not be a threat, it may not be an unknown, it may not be alien, but it might in fact be family. It might be lineage. It might be part of this grand fabric that is interwoven all throughout the cosmos, and it simply interweaves right through the Earth. It's part of the Earth is just in the weave. So Akashic information about the mantis is on many planets. Akashic information about the reptiles is on many planets. Akashic information about the avians is on many planets. So here on Earth, We're just seeing a manifestation of the cross-section of all of that life and what it looks like at this particular nexus. And the other people who come here to visit, they might look at a blue jay and say, wow, that looks like a magnomian. I love coming up with random, ridiculous words. Anyway, they would see it. They would say that looks like that life form from our place of existence. And yeah, so I guess I didn't really plan to go that far off track on how a third density consciousness enters a vessel that might be more of a hominid with a mantis head or an avian or whatever. But you start to see how all of these things connect and how they tie together and how you end up with coherence. Not the least of which, just to go to a little farther down this road, but not the least of which is what people have traditionally and always described as angels. So an angel, a lot of people acknowledge, is just probably an extraterrestrial being of which we've assigned a certain and special spiritual aspect to. But outside of the concept of angels, you have the concept of avians, which are the same thing. It's the same thing. It's an advanced intelligence, probably not third density, fourth, fifth, something else, higher density. But this intelligence is taking the form of hominid and hominid meeting bird. So the hominid meets the bird for them. You have the avians, and many believe these avians are what has visited us in the past, and people have, from certain spiritual viewpoints, considered them angels. And the mantis is another, the reptilian, all of these common things that we hear about. They're the result of the same thing we are the result of, except that in our case, it is the hominid primate. And so the hominid primate becomes the vessel here for third density. And anyway, when we're looking at the graduation on this planet, you would say, well, okay, once the animal achieves self-awareness, it then will return when it incarnates again in whatever the third density vessel is that is available within that material realm that can serve as a vessel for it. So it isn't considered to be the case that we have third density intelligence like ours running around in wolves and birds, and not saying anything is impossible. These are all ideas, but the understanding one gets from the law of one is that that's not what's going on here. What's going on here is third density consciousness, for the most part, is us. And we see the second density and we see the first density. For what it's worth, we are also composed of all of these densities. We have rock within us, earth within us, in the form of bone, and a great percentage of the body that we're made of is water, and there is electricity traveling through our nervous system, aka plasma fire, and of course in between all of that is space. We breathe air, so yes, we are and we are walking around. We are a walking assemblage of the first density. Stacked on top of that is the second density in the form of cells in your body, your organs, basically everything that has life force. These things will respond to stimuli, and so a cell in your body will try to survive. That's why it is not first density, it is second density. So the actual vessel piloted by a third density consciousness is made out of the first and the second density. So now, with regards to animal ascension, it's basically described, and I will interpret to the best of my memory and understanding what is said in the Law of One, but essentially the way that this life evolves on this planet is not a matter of Darwinistic survival of the fittest and small mutations being rewarded in the marketplace of life and resulting in the thriving of that mutated being, and that's how we get. There's a lot of problems with that I'm not going to really go into in this film, but a big one among them is time. It just would take such now that we know how incredibly complex the genetic code is, we are able to see better now than at the time these ideas were introduced by Darwin and others. We're able to see more clearly now how much time it would take, just doing raw math, for these types of mutations to then form into and change life as we know it on this planet the way we've observed it, and it just doesn't work. There's something missing there in terms of how that happens from the straight scientific model. But anyway, if your mind wanders into the esoterics and the vibrational universe and all of this fun stuff we like to talk about on planetOZ, then it really doesn't matter exactly what science is saying. You're looking at what these other things are saying. And so yeah, the evolution as it's described in the Law of One, as I understand it, is that it's not coming from the clashing mutations that occur on this planet. It's coming from the information that is bombarding the planet in the form of light coming from the sun. So in short, if you wanted to trace back the evolution of Earth and how we were a first density planet for a very long time, and then second density life started to emerge, and then eventually we became ready for third density. If you want to see all that and understand where that is all originating, who's directing that? Who's in charge of that? It's you would look at it as not something that's happening within the ecosystem of the Earth, or decisions that are really even made by the Earth as a consciousness itself. If you're thinking about it as Gaia, these would actually be decisions that are being made by the sun as a life force and a consciousness. So the sun will change the fidelity, the character of the light, and the information that is in the light, and in doing so begin to ascend the life forms that are on the planet. So in that sense, you would take the planet Earth and you would look at it at a point in history when it was just water and there wasn't any life. And so the traditional science viewpoint will tell us that something happened with crystals and crystallization around water and whatever, and life just kind of spontaneously comes out of non-life. But according to the Law of One and this idea of the sun informing the life, it would be that you would have, let's say, the ocean, and the ocean wouldn't have any life in it. And you could bombard that ocean for trillions of years with first density light. And the Darwinian idea, the kind of straight science atom crashing model of life emerging, would never happen. Trillions of years, this Earth would just spin with its first density, if first density light is all our sun is shining upon it. So it isn't until the sun, making a conscious decision, shaping the family of the solar system, which it is in charge of, overseeing, I guess, as it's making this decision, it would then decide that it wishes to see what second density life will manifest on one of its children, so to speak. If you were to think of the planets as the children of the sun, then the sun decides what it wants its children to do and what it wants to see. And if it were to decide that it is time for second density life on Earth, it will change the fidelity of the light. So then you have a different frequency, a different vibration, a faster vibration. Now it is bombarding the water. And what happens then is the water then begins to, this light is hitting the water, and the water is now imbued with second density information, second density recipes, if you want to call it that, or electricity or energy or information. But once that light starts hitting the water, that is when the little organisms and the crystals and the things start to form in the water. So the scientific ideas about it wouldn't necessarily be totally off or wrong. It's just really more of like, is that the reason, or is that the manifestation of another reason why this is happening? So sunlight hits the water at second density resolution, you could say, frequency, and all of a sudden you start getting water and you start seeing plants emerge on land and undersea and little single-celled animals, and then they evolve. And whatever at any given time is the cross-section of complexity of the life on the planet, it's going to be a reflection of the fidelity of the light hitting that planet, and that's what's going to allow all this to happen. So once you get to a place like the Earth is now, where you have first, second, and third density cohabitating, some say there are higher densities walking among us as well, but for practical purposes here, first, second, and third, and you're looking at this idea of awareness as that thing that happens for the individuation. So in the case of the animal, it's discussed in the Law of One that we can ascend our paths, that second density ascension into third density is happening a lot on this planet, and the main way that it is happening is through pet ownership, through basically the domestication of animals. So the idea there is that happens because we take on a second density consciousness, and then we imbue it with a lot that it is not familiar with and not typically exposed to in nature. First and foremost, it's constantly exposed to third density vibration. So the vibration of third density consciousness is constantly bombarding animals that we keep within our presence. And so they are just automatically, that is going to offer them an increase in their own vibration simply by allowing that in and allowing that to happen. But on top of that, the way that we treat the animals, we give them all this attention, we love them, and essentially we vest them with an awareness of individuation. The dog thinks it's the whole pack. And after it spends enough time with us, and after we keep focusing on this one dog, and it keeps experiencing focus just on itself, it can rapidly become aware of the concept of self. And so then you're going to get, once it passes on, it will incarnate in the third density. But this goes even further than that. According to the Law of One, some other things can happen where, for example, it will say a group of people, a very large group of third density consciousnesses who are focusing on a particular animal as a class. Let's just say, for example, in the Hindu religion, when there's the reverence for the cow. So when people focus all of this energy on even the idea of the cow, it fuels the ascension of the cow as a species across it. And this is just it sounds weird, but it's related to this idea that everything is consciousness, and this is kind of like a shared lucid dream, and that it is shaped and it is co-created, and we're doing all this. So we are co-creating the second density and the first density that we see all around us, not just in what we do physically and materially, but what we do in terms of thought and in terms of our energy. So we can think the cow to ascension. It doesn't have to be a single individual cow. And in this same way, the third density consciousness, with its conscious intent, can do the same thing to the first density. The first density does also graduate into the second density. So this is, I was discussing earlier with water, this is said to, the graduation is said to occur there when, when the light reaches a particular fidelity, it's hitting this first density life, and the first density life of the water has this stirring inside it to almost to reproduce, so to speak. And so with that, it will begin to manifest this second density life just out from it. And I have yet to see an explanation of this or a little bit more in-depth science. So for the moment, this is something purely from the mind of Oz, but it is a head scratcher to me that they do find thousands and thousands of feet down in the rock will be found these worms, like looking almost like centipedes, I guess, and these worms, deep down in the rock, they're barely moving. They hardly move at all, and they're just in this environment, to just basically it's very difficult to look at it and try to get a sense of how mating occurs between these creatures moving so incredibly slow, how that all works. And so it's just a theory, it's just speculation, but one might wonder if such life is just kind of born from the rock. That if we look for the way in which these worms mate or reproduce, or how that happens, if we look for the genesis of where these worms are coming from, we might find that it's kind of like the water becoming the single-celled thing in that birth of life sequence. Within the rock, combined with water, and this recipe, this cocktail forms, and these worms are just kind of born out of the rock. Thousands of feet down, a very, very primitive, simple form of life is being generated in that way. That's a planetOZ idea, but it does say in the Law of One that it talks about the fact that the third density consciousness is capable of graduating the first density to second in the same way as it can graduate the second density to third, or at least help. And this was, the description was like as if there was like a rock. Imagine this rock, and it's got a interesting shape to it. It's positioned in a strange way, or strange place. Whatever it is, for some reason, third density conscious humans decide that this rock is special. They just think it has some sort of spiritualistic, ritualistic nature, or something about it is mystical. And let's just assume for a moment that there was no truth to that before these humans came along and decided it, but it was just because of the nature of where this rock had ended up and whatever, they decided that this is a sacred rock. So the next thing you know, thousands, maybe millions of people over time are coming to this rock, and they are believing that this rock is sacred, that this rock, well, basically, as thought imbues into other thought, and as a thought form like a rock is imbued and vested by us with all of this thought, intention, and attention, the rock will ascend. The Law of One talks about how you would identify a rock ascending in nature if you were to come upon it as one that has moss growing off of it. So the minerals from the rock are giving way to the second density life, and if you were to watch that in incredibly high speed over millions of years maybe, you would see this rock morph from a stone into living greenery. It's not just the minerals, it's not just the water, it's not just one thing parasitically leaching off another. The life force underlining is moving through there, the first density becoming second. So, you could just imagine that the rocks at, say, Stonehenge, or the rock that is creating Mount Rushmore, or the rocks that are used to form sacred temples, the rocks that are forming the Egyptian pyramids. All of this is presumably going to be that rock which is the closest to graduating and creating second density life in the form of moss or however else. Again, this is an area that doesn't have tons of documentation about it. I mean, hopefully there's a bunch out there that I haven't found, so if anybody knows of that, let me know. But I think that, that just compared to what is written and discussed as to third density human ascension, it's a different deal. But anyway, I think that's enough expounding on this animal ascension, and the ascension from first to second to third density and then beyond is a topic of particular fascination to me in the midst of all of these other incredibly broad realm of all things esoteric. So I'll definitely be revisiting this concept again. And again and again, and if I do come across amazingness, I will chime in with you all to share some more learned about animal ascension and the densities. So that's it for now.